Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies, I welcome you all to the launch of the Brazilian translation of Making Empire, Fazendo Império, written by the art historian Jane Ohlmeyer. Making Empire examines Ireland not as a periphery, but as constituent part of the First English Empire, published by the editora Unifesp. The Brazilian Portuguese edition of Making Empire was an initiative of the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies, coordinated by Professors Laura Zaha and Mariana Buffarini, and its collective translation made by graduate students in linguistic and literary studies in English at the University of São Paulo was coordinated by Professor Luciana Carvalho Fonseca. I'll now invite Mr. Consul General of Ireland in São Paulo, Mr. Robert Jackson, Professors Jane Ohlmeyer, Mariana Buffarini, Luciana Carvalho Fonseca, and Miriane Mendes de Abreu to take their place at the table.
Do you care where we sit?
No.
There's no special order.
No special order.
Over here, Robert, please. Yes.
Sound, yes, okay. I now give the floor to the Consul, General of the Council of Ireland, Mr. Robert Jackson.
I think this one's working here.
No, it's working as well. Yeah.
Second time any better? Okay. Boa noite. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in the presence of some legends of scholarship. Quite intimidated. And also happy to be the token man. That doesn't happen often enough. So for once I'm being the one to present a womel rather than a manel. And I'm sure all of you have seen more than enough of that throughout your careers. I'm delighted to be here sitting beside Jane and to see this incredible piece of translation. I don't know how you do it. In the last year here, I have learned how much work goes into a translation, none of which I had ever guessed before. And I see an Irish translator as well here with us. So I am genuinely in awe of what you do. I'm not even going to try to attempt to explain all of Jane's work. We would be here for hours, and none of you came here to listen to me. I've listened to excerpts of this, and I promised myself if I'm a good boy, I'm allowed to buy myself this in a couple of weeks' time when things get quieter. I've heard so many good reviews about it. I think you've described Ireland as being the laboratory of colonialism, but I think is it also fair to say we were often the labour and the instigators? So you are dealing with some very challenging topics, making us look at both our role as taking part in and having colonialism thrust upon us. Difficult dialogues, difficult subjects. I can only imagine difficult to translate as well, getting the nuance into what Jane is saying and all of the research that she's done. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for translating it. I very much look forward to being able to share this with a wider audience in Brazil. And Mariana, thank you so much for this invitation. It's, as always, a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
And I now give the floor to Professor Miriane Mendes de Abreu, She's Associate Professor of Brazilian Literature at the Federal University of São Paulo and Director of Editora Unifesp.
I'd like to speak in Portuguese, as I told you to Laura, and well, in Portuguese. So. Hã? Estamos no Brasil, isso. Nós estávamos num evento da FAPESP quando eu assisti à palestra da professora Jane e fui muito impactada pelo conteúdo, pela clareza e pela exposição de uma colonização, das formas de colonização que tem muito paralelo com o Brasil. Então, eu pensei que se tratava de um livro do meu interesse particular, mas também do interesse de todos aqueles que querem estudar, ler mais, se aprofundar sobre as formas de colonização, sejam na Irlanda, sejam nos países que passaram por esse processo. Dessa forma, é um livro que interessa as pessoas que querem entender relações internacionais, relações de colonização, maneiras de compreender as formas transculturais também. Imediatamente, assim que acabou a palestra, eu procurei a professora Jane e perguntei se ela gostaria de ter uma tradução em língua portuguesa e ofereci a possibilidade da editora Unifesp capitanear essa tradução, a edição dessa tradução, porque a responsável foi a professora Laura, a professora Luciana, Mariana, são outras. Nós estivemos envolvidos no processo de editoração. Isso não seria possível sem uma equipe, ainda que enxuta, mas muito comprometida. Ali está a nossa chefe de projetos editoriais, que foi muito competente e dedicada. Tivemos o cuidado com a capa também, que a capa pudesse expressar esse conteúdo e que pudesse apresentar o que significa Fazendo Império. Nesse livro, a gente vai encontrar a força da análise, dividida em alguns capítulos, que eu separei aqui, capítulo 1, que se inspira na discutir as tensões da cultura, o capítulo 2, a anglicização, o capítulo 3, que fala da assimilação, explorando casamentos, o capítulo 4, agentes do império, o 5º capítulo, que situa a Irlanda no campo de experimentação de políticas, o capítulo 6º, impérios na Irlanda, e é evidente que eu não poderia deixar de fazer paralelos com a colonização portuguesa, isso é inevitável. Portanto, é um convite à leitura em língua portuguesa de um livro que é relevante para o mundo irlandês e é relevante para todos os países que passaram por esse processo de colonização. Por isso, eu fico muito satisfeita de poder estar aqui nesse evento, fazendo esse lançamento. Agradeço imensamente a Cátedra, a Embaixada da Irlanda, toda a equipe de tradução também, além da própria Jane, que fez a intermediação com a Universidade de Oxford, com a editora de lá, que nos permitiu, então, hoje, mais de um ano, né? Um ano e pouco, que nós conseguimos, então, concluir esse trabalho com êxito e convido a todos à leitura. Acho que a autora falará com mais propriedade. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada.
Now I give the floor to Jane Ohlmeyer. Jane is Erasmus Smith Professor of Modern History at Trinity College Dublin and Chair of the Art Research Council. Grew up in Belfast during the Troubles before going to Scotland to study history. After completing her PhD in history at Trinity College Dublin, under the supervision of the late Professor Aidan Clark, she taught at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Yale, and University of Aberdeen. In 2003, she returned to Trinity as the Erasmus Smith Professor of History. Over the past 2 decades, she has served Trinity College Dublin community as teacher, scholar, supervisor, mentor, head of department, head of school, founding the vice president for global relations, and director at the Trinity Long Room Hub Arts and Humanities Research Institute.
Thank you.
Firstly, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Absolute privilege to be here. I'm overwhelmed, actually. I am so deeply grateful to you all. And I'm seeing this for the first time tonight, so I am just so excited. It's fantastic. It doesn't matter how many books you publish, folks. There's nothing like seeing a book for the first time. And of course, for me, it's like a new book. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Laura had suggested that I talk for maybe 20 minutes or so, and I do have some slides. And I'm just conscious of your comfort levels. Would you be more comfortable there if there are slides? And then we can would that be better? Yeah, and this is quite a big room, so what I'm going to do is, Victor, can I get you to do the slides for me? And I hate the table in the way. I'll come out. I feel it's too much like a lecture, whereas I'd really like it to be a conversation, in as much as we can do this. So, and if Victor just moves the slides on for me, that would be marvelous. So if you wouldn't mind the first slide. I decided to put the translation beside the original English edition, partly because the cover works so well. We're not going to tell Oxford that we like the Portuguese cover better than theirs. But the original cover took inspiration from an amazing artist, a woman called Rita Duffy. And Rita Duffy has this image of Ireland, and you can see partition, and it's printed on a tea towel, and it's basically how you stitch north and south back together. I should have put it in there, and I thought, well, that's going to be the cover of this book, or a version of that. And then the arrows. There, I love the work of an artist called William Kendridge. He's a South African artist who does a lot around colonialism. And those are Kendridge's arrows on Rita Duffy's map. Anyway, that's the English edition. Next slide, please. So lots of thanks to everybody who made this possible. As we've already heard, it all began, seems like yesterday at an event organized by FAPESP. The professionalism of the press is just extraordinary. You've been an absolute dream to work with. And I do want to thank the translators. Put your hand up if you were one of the translators here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, of course, Victor was. I prostrate myself at your feet. I mean, what an incredible job you have done. We had one phone call where all of the sort of gremlins were being worked out, and it took about decolonizing somebody's work. I mean, it's very humbling when you go through this sort of line by line. And I think it's when things like black market, of course, I didn't think that was a pejorative term until I think it was maybe Victor pointed that out, or how you translate big house. It has one meaning here in Brazil. It has a very different meaning, of course, in Ireland. And there was just one issue after another, and I came off that call wishing I had recorded the call, actually, because I just found it so, as I say, humbling to talk with this amazing group that Laura and Mariana had sort of convened. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful to you all. And I can't read Portuguese, but I've got friends who can, and I can't wait to give them a copy. Next slide, please. I do want to say, though, that this book represents the culmination of a lot of collaboration between Trinity, my university, and the University of Sao Paulo particularly, and the WBA chair. Laura, our conversations with you and Manira began in 2010, 11. We got our first grant in 2012, and we have been collaborating ever since. You're talking about generations of, I see Munira as the grandmother and Laura the mother. You both, and now with this amazing team, have created here in Brazil for Irish Studies is enormous. And I feel very privileged that we in Trinity had an opportunity to collaborate with you. And I know you collaborate with all of the universities, but I was so delighted to be part of that. And I think you have done a huge amount of amazing work, not just at an academic level. I think Ireland should be very grateful, and I know they are, and Robert and DFA, support you, and maybe a bit more, Robert. I mean, we need to really get as much as we can for these programs. Next slide, please. It sort of culminated for us with the Crisis of Democracy. Little did we realize then that actually 2017, 18, 19, those weren't the bad days. We were just gearing up. But we did have an amazing winter school here in Paulo, and we went to Parachi and then on to Rio, and then COVID came and the world changed. But those sorts of collaborations are bringing just scholars from around the world. But that work was very public facing as well, and it certainly was extremely timely. And I know Tiago and Laura published a book on the basis of those summer programs. Next slide, please. I want to just say very quickly how the book is now informing current work that I'm doing. I have a European Research Council grant called Voices, where we're looking at the lived experiences of non-elite women. Now, these ERCs are like hitting the academic jackpot in terms of they give you €2.5 million, and I'm not even going to begin to translate how much that is into reales. It's a lot. And it allows for these big 5-year interdisciplinary collaborative projects. We're into year 2, but I'm particularly interested in women and colonialism, the extent to which women are very active perpetrators as colonists, but of course how Indigenous women are impacted by imperialism. My focus is Ireland, again, using Ireland as a lens to explore particularly the Iberian world, but I'm also very interested in, say, for example, the Dutch colonial world, so doing a lot of comparative work. Next slide, please. Another way that this work has been continued is through the film. From That Small Island, we're screening it this evening. I hope you'll be able to join us for that screening. You will, some of what I'm about to say, you'll hear on the big screen, because without a shadow of a doubt, Making Empire did influence the documentary that you'll see this evening, and the 4 one-hour episodes that have also been screened on RTE and are being screened around the world over the coming months. So in other words, all I'm trying to say is you publish a book and it goes on, and it's like the waves, the ripples continue. Next slide, please. The other thing about this book, actually, it began as a series of lectures in Oxford, and then they came to the University of Sao Paulo. That was in 2022. You probably recognize some of the faces. On that occasion, Stephen Ray, the actor, joined the final class. Do you remember that, Laura? I don't know if anybody else was there that day. And we read from Making History, one of Brian Friel's plays, and then went on to watch the Secrets from Putumayo. But for me, this book is as much... It benefited hugely from interactions with colleagues here on the ground in Brazil. It really shaped it. Next slide, please. I just want to take a step back and say, why do we bother doing all of this? Why should we be interested in studying empire and issues around empire? And I think the simple answer is, is because they are affecting every aspect of the world today. I always say it's empires, not nation states, that were the staple of history for millennia. Nation states are blips on the historical horizon. So empire comes in many forms, but it is the reality of history more than anything. And when we're talking about empire, I think we have to be very clear. We're talking about very violent regimes. We're talking about regimes that are about the extraction of resources, the deployment of labour, the acquisition of land, and settler colonialism. Whether you're looking at Ireland in the 17th century or Israel in the 21st century, settler colonialism is settler colonialism. And as we talk about empire, I think it's really important to talk about resistance to empire and colonial wars. And again, we have examples in Ireland. I focus in the book on the early modern period, but I lived in Belfast. We call it the Troubles, as if, oh, it was just the trouble. But it was a civil war, it was a colonial war. And the scars of which people are still negotiating. Liam and I were chatting about those dark days earlier. And I think we're at a moment when we're looking at it through a very different lens, and thank God Ireland's at peace, but those were difficult, difficult days. Final thing I want to say about empires is that they influence basically every aspect of our life today. And we just need to look at what's going on in the Middle East, the Ukraine, these constant reminders of the afterlives of empires. So I'm very much hoping that this book is making a contribution to those wider discussions as well. Next slide, please. Just to say the 4 lectures are available online on the RTE website if anybody wants to watch. So there's 6 hours of them. Next slide. Miriam, you did a lovely summary of the book in Portuguese, and I'm not going to summarize it here. I just want to pick out a few things that may be of interest, just to say a few words about it, especially for people who haven't read it. And the 4 things that I'd like to say a few words about. One is that Ireland was England's first colony. Some people would say Northern Ireland might be its last. We'll see. The second thing, that was a very politically incorrect thing to say, Robert, sorry. You didn't hear that. The second point is Ireland as laboratory for empire. I think we see that time and again, whether it's ideology or partition. Remember the legislation that partitioned Ireland, the exact same legislation was used to partition Israel and Palestine, India and Pakistan. I mean, they just crossed out the Ireland and added in the other names. The Irish as agents of empire. We were, if you want, the victims of colonization and active perpetrators of empire, not just in the English/British Empire. The Irish were trans-imperial. We were extremely active in the empires of France, of Spain, of Portugal, of the Dutch, and so on. And then remembering, I think, is another, how we remember empire and how it has influenced things today. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but when we think of colonial Ireland, people don't sometimes want to engage with the fact that Ireland was a classic colony. And obviously I am arguing that very, very vociferously in this book. And we see, especially in 17th century Ireland, instances of what today we would call ethnic cleansing and genocide. You'll see it in the film this evening. Now, people in the 17th century don't use that language because they don't have that language, but that's effectively what's happening. And I say to people, if you want to understand what Ireland was like in the 17th century, look at Gaza today. It's that level of violence that we saw deployed. Settler colonialism, obviously a feature of life in Ireland, actually from the 12th century, but really gains momentum in the late 16th, 17th century across the country, particularly in Ulster. And again, we're living with the consequences of that. Then the other 2 forms of imperialism that we need to be very mindful of, cultural imperialism, that word Anglicization, it's really how you take a people and make that people English. They use this word civilization. There's no civility to any of this, but that would have been the word used. And that's every aspect of culture, from language to law to architecture. And then the last part is economic imperialism. Ireland basically existed to fuel the English economy. And by the mid-17th century, Ireland played a hugely important role in English global expansionism, and it did so in three ways. One was labour. I'll say a few words about indentured service in a moment. The second was land. Basically, 8 million acres of Irish land was expropriated in the 8 million acres. Let me just say that it's the largest amount of land ever expropriated in Europe. It was reallocated then to adventurers who were the ones who were really proposed behind English imperial expansion. So if you could say Irish land helped to fuel English imperialism around the globe. And the third key way that Ireland economically was so important was it helped to provision empire. In other words, especially in the Caribbean, Ireland fed the Caribbean colonies, but also other colonies as well. So it's in those three respects that the economic imperialism is so important in terms of the impact it had in Ireland, but also the way it fueled a wider imperial agenda for England and later Britain. Next slide. In terms of laboratory for empire, I'm just going to give you a single example of how Ireland was a laboratory for empire, and it's how ideas around ethnocentricity, what we would call today racism, were born in Ireland and then deployed not just across the Irish world, but across the Anglophone world. It all began with this man, Gerald of Wales, his Topographia, where he depicted the Irish as barbarous, uncivil, savage. And then that rhetoric of othering, next slide, really sort of gains momentum in the 16th and then really in the early 17th century with a man called Edmund Spenser. Spenser's Short View of the State of Ireland was a hugely important foundational text in that it then said, well, actually, it's not just the Irish are barbarous and Catholic, but they're human as well. And what we really need to do is we need to get rid of them altogether and replace them with English-speaking Protestants. So it's effectively genocide what Spenser is calling for in a view of the state of Ireland. Next slide, please. And where Spenser is so important is those ideas weren't just influential in the context of the 17th century, they went on to shape basically ideas about Ireland and the Irish right through into the early 20th century. It became a foundational text. And these sorts of images that are behind me are visual expressions of what Spenser was saying in an earlier period. We can trace this direct lineage. Next slide, please. Okay. I don't want to talk for too long because I know others want to get in on the conversation and Mariana has plans for us. But I do want to say a few words about Ireland, the Irish as agents of empire. And as I said earlier, it's not just the English Empire, it's all of the European empires, but it's the English Empire I tend to focus on in the book. And wherever you see the green dots is wherever you'll find people from Ireland in the early, by the 1660s. I mean, wherever the Europeans go, the Irish are there. They're parts of the spiritual empires, especially the Jesuits and the Franciscans, including here, of course, in Sao Paulo with Thomas Field. They're there as part of navies. They're very active as privateers, pirates, as well as sailing in the navies of all the European powers. They're very active as frontiersmen, as governors, as servants, as mercenaries. We see Irish soldiers literally fighting in armies around the world. Next slide, please. I just want to focus for a moment in the Caribbean, simply because that's where we see Irish people or people from Ireland being deployed as indentured servants. Now remember, being an indentured servant is very different from being a chattel slave, because at least after the end of 5 or 6, 7 years, you do get your freedom if you've survived, plus some sort of a living. But basically, the numbers of Irish people who go, especially to the Caribbean, in the early decades of the 17th century, they go in their tens of thousands. And they're going on a voluntary basis. Then in the 1650s, we have Oliver Cromwell coming into Ireland, and it's no longer voluntary. He basically is shipping out, again, tens of thousands of Irish men, women, and children. At least a third of these indentured servants are female. And again, the work we're doing in Voices, we're trying to look at them, children as young as 5. And the life of an indentured servant, whether wherever you were, was grim. Next slide, please. Montserrat is known as the Irish island. The bulk of the population in Montserrat's a little volcanic footnote, basically, in the Leeward Islands, is the only country outside of Ireland that formally celebrates St. Patrick's Day. There's lots of reasons why. But let's remember that by the end of the 17th century, the bulk of the white population were Irish, and that meant the bulk of the slave owners and the plantation owners were also Irish. Next slide, please. Barbados is going to feature in the film tonight. We actually had an opportunity to film there. Barbados is a fascinating island when it comes to Ireland, because again, it's where the bulk of those indentured servants go in the early decades of the 17th century. Barbados was where most of the sugar, we're talking now, it's all about sugar and slaves, but slaves don't come until after the 1660s. So in that first 50 years, it's all really Irish indentured servants. Next slide, please. And what are they doing? They're harvesting sugar. This is absolutely black-breaking work. Increasingly, the Irish indentured servants worked alongside black enslaved Africans. But right up until the 1670s, you would have had women working in the sugar plantations alongside the men. Next slide, please. I want to say a bit about the slave trade and the Irish engagement in the slave trade. Obviously, we see Ireland provisioning the Caribbean, and that's bringing a lot of money back into Ireland. We see Ireland, or people from Ireland, being slave owners, but we also see Irish people being very engaged in the a transaction, the selling of enslaved people. So this is an iconic image that the abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, it was really to try and stir up support for abolitionism. Anyway, that ship, and again, every time I look at it, it's the dehumanizing way that these people are laid out. But the man who was the captain of that ship was a man called Clement Noble from Ardmore, which is in County Waterford. And we see this time and again. The Irish are all over the slave trade, especially the slave trade of Spain and France, as well as England. Next slide, please. The first slave owner in these parts was Bernardo O'Brien in the Amazon. We have his accounts from the 1620s and 30s telling us about how he has enslaved the indigenous Tupis, as well as increasingly brings in some black Africans. It's a very complicated, not complicated, but it's a very intricate commercial network operating at this period. And again, you don't have to look very far to find the Irish are very involved in it. Next slide, please. I had the privilege of visiting Recife when I was here, must have been 2022, and I went to where the slave market was in Recife. I don't know if you've been to Recife, but there's a synagogue, I think dates from 1654. Just outside the synagogue is where the Recife slave market would have been. Some of those people who would have been selling and buying those slaves would be men from Ireland. Next slide. This is just when it comes to Brazilian slavery, I don't think people outside of Brazil appreciate that more African slaves came to Brazil than to any other country, including the United States. And most of them, of course, went to serve, to be enslaved in the mines. Again, on that trip, I had an opportunity to go to look at the archives in Mariana, which would have been a major center for slaves. And you look at this, the way that the slaves are being recorded, and of course, they're no longer humans. The level of dehumanization when you look at these accounts is just so chilling. Next slide, please. But the other thing is to look at how this relationship with slavery is being remembered in a place like Ouro Preto. I was very, again, struck by how it becomes a form of tourism, obviously a very dark form of tourism, and that you have these opportunities to go into the mines. But as you go into the mines, you realize that you're literally walking on the bodies of people who have died there. It's, again, I found it fascinating to see how it was being depicted. Next slide. And then you have this incredible church, Our Lady of the Rosary of the Blacks in Ouro Preto, where, again, I was so moved by the way the whole church is actually dedicated to the enslaved peoples. It's in the poorest part of the town, and it's not a very wealthy church, but it still is a very powerful testament. Next slide, please. And then I went up to Olinda to look at the slave market there, and that's what you see. Now, it was a pretty grim day, but it's such a depressing place. There is nothing to indicate whatever happened there. And this brings me to the final point, and then I'll finish, is how we remember all of this today. Next slide, please. Because, and here I'm going back to Ireland, rather than, I'll leave you guys to comment on Brazil. I was just struck by a number of things here. But back in Ireland, the truth is, until very recently, we wanted to pretend that we had nothing to do with empire. Empire was not something that people from Ireland engaged in. We were happy to be victims, but we didn't want to acknowledge the fact we'd also been perpetrators. It's a very, very, very complicated relationship. Nor as people ate sugar, smoked tobacco, ate potatoes, people weren't really thinking about how all of this had impacted on their lives or on the lives of the people that had to produce the tobacco and the sugar. Next slide, please. And then I come to my own university. It's Trinity College Dublin, the facade of which was funded by income from the tobacco trade. But the truth is, most of Dublin is an imperial city. Most of the grand buildings were funded as a result of engagement with sugar, with slavery, with tobacco. Next slide, please. And the question is, how do we as a university community actually engage with this? Because it's only now that Ireland actually has commissioned a government body to say, well, how do we engage with reparations? What are we doing to actually look at our the legacies of empire in Ireland? So that's happening at the national level. That group yet has to report to government, but it should report within the next 6 months. At the university level, Trinity was founded as an instrument of empire. That was our mission, that was our role, as it was of many universities in this period, including, of course, we've just come from Mexico. It's the same thing. Why do you found a university? To train young men to go out and proselytize and become servants of empire. Anyway, Trinity was the same. We have many materials in our collection, many objects, including human remains that were gotten through inappropriate means, including from the islands off the west coast of Ireland, and an island called Inishbofin, 1890s, Trinity anatomists went and stole bodies. They were practicing an early form of eugenics. They thought that the skulls, these people were a lesser form of human. Anyway, Trinity has now returned those human remains to Inishbofin, Ireland. But, you know, maybe there's 400 other skeletons, literally, you know, the provenance of which some we know where they come from, others we don't. So I think as a university we're having this conversation around our collections, and it's been a very positive development mostly. Next slide, please. It includes Trinity denaming the Berkeley Library and renaming it the Evan Boland Library. Now, while I'm all in favour of the Evan Boland Library, I think this issue of naming and denaming is complicated. The reason we denamed was because George Berkeley, the Irish philosopher, owned slaves on his plantation in Rhode Island. And the truth is, if the students hadn't lobbied for the denaming and renaming, it probably wouldn't have happened. It was all in a moment. Was it the right thing to do? Personally, I'm a retain and explain person because I think lest we ever forget. But I think there's a discussion to be had there. Next slide. So I'm going to wrap things up with 3 images from an amazing artist. I mentioned her at the beginning, Rita Duffy, who was here, I think this time last year. I think when it comes to issues around colonialism, Rita, who is from Belfast, I think one of Ireland's best contemporary artists, captures brilliantly. And this is the raft of the Medusa that she did at the time of Brexit. And of course, Brexit was all about British nostalgia to reclaim empire. I really think that a lot of that was, you know, driving those Brexit conversations. Next slide, please. The other thing Rita does very powerfully is allowing us in Ireland to talk about these issues, in this case around partition. She had a marvellous show that was in County Cork about 2 years ago called Illusions, which really just focused on the issue of partition in Ireland today. You know, we're in a very interesting space about the future, and I think this focus on a shared island, which has been very much the way the government has approached it, is the right one. We don't talk about a united Ireland anymore, but you know, there's still no escaping partition and the damage that has caused, the legacies. And then this final slide. What Rita has to say about the global American empire is incredibly powerful. I don't know if you can see the detail here, but it was painted in the aftermath of the 6th of January onslaught, sort of the seat of democracy being attacked with the approbation of a sitting president. In this, she depicts Donald Trump. He's always naked in Rita's drawings. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them. He always has the saggiest arse imaginable, usually propped up by a golf club, and then the most minuscule penis. You sort of have to get your magnifying glass out. I'm sure Donald Trump. But it's the way Rita is able to use humor so powerfully in some of these images. But we have the covered wagon. Of course, who invented the covered wagon? The Ulster Scots. And there we have Donald Trump, literally the wagon being pulled by enslaved Africans. In the background, you have statues might fall. And then in the foreground, we see these white nationalists, extremists, many of whom are Irish Catholics. So again, it cuts to the dilemma of what it means to be Irish in an age of empire. And I think, Mariana, I might stop there, but I hope I've given you a bit of a flavour of the book, but also the wider context of why I think it matters to talk about these things, but to do so in a very respectful way and a way that it's empirically grounded, because we don't need any hysteria about this. It needs to be it's a very important conversation that, and I think we in Ireland are beginning to have it. So, and about that, I'm delighted. Anyway, thank you very much.
So now I shall give the floor to Mariana Buffarini. She's coordinator of the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies.
Hello, good evening, everyone. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Jane and all of you who are present, especially representing the chair, the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies, which is coordinated by Professor Laura, and of course, Professor Munira Mutran, who is here. Both of them spearheaded Irish Studies in Brazil, as you know. I will just say just a few words about Jane, especially. I met Jane in 2016, and it was a great pleasure to be with her here in São Paulo, in Brasilia, and in Manaus for the celebration of Casement's, the centenary of Casement's death, and of course the Rising and the decade of commemorations. And just working with Jane to have the opportunity of translating and being part of the translation of Making Empire is really, truly an honor, right? So I will just say a few words that, because of course Jane has already explained the contents of the book, as did Professor Miriani from Unifesp. But this is a very important piece of work as it, as I would just like to mention the cover of the book, because as we were in Manaus, we took this boat trip to the river, so the joining of the two rivers, Solimões and Rio Negro. And I suppose that this cover, which was very beautifully made, really reminds me both of the joining of the rivers in Brazil, and of course the orange, which refers, and the green, right, which refers to Ireland. So this book brings together two languages through translation, which is a bridge, right? So it's a bridge between language, between cultures. And also, as Professor Miriani has also mentioned, it really makes us and has made us the team that translated of course, that Professor Luciana will talk more about this because it was a collective translation coordinated by Professor Luciana Carvalho. But it has made us to reflect, to rethink, and to signify the role of language, as Professor Jane has also mentioned. And also our culture, Brazilian and Irish, and the role that we have played also as agents of empire as well as victims, just in a very similar way to the Irish. And this idea of Ireland as a laboratory of empire, which brings us to the heart of Irish studies in Brazil. Because, of course, Irish Studies is about rethinking and resignifying our own Brazilian culture, our Brazilian literature, the Brazilian Portuguese language, in comparison with Ireland. So we think of Brazil, and we also think about Ireland during this whole process. So to bring this this book, Fazendo Império, Making Empire. The title, as a matter of fact, was deeply discussed. We left it to the end. The decision as regards the title, which of course comes after a play by Brian Friel, right? So an Irish playwright. So I would just like to thank Jane for trusting us, for giving to Brazil and to readers in Portuguese this excellent contribution, which has already been pointed out by Professor Miliani, by Jane, because it symbolizes all this collaborative work that has been ongoing since the 1980s. So thank you, Jane, and thank you all of you involved.
Now I'd like to call Professor Luciana Carvalho Fonseca. She's a professor at the Department of Modern Language, and she coordinated the translation of Making Empire.
Hope this is working, yes. And now you have seen my longest surviving typo. The date here on the slides is the date of the last Irish Studies seminar, October 24th. Right, so I apologize for the wrong date on the slide. Okay, so I'll just like to contextualize a little bit about collective translation at the University of São Paulo. Oops, hang on. Oh. What's going on here?
There's no escaping me.
Because that is my slide. But when I move it, something else happens. I only have 8 slides, they're very quick. Sure, no problem. Okay. So my second, oops. Okay. My second slide is exactly like Jane's second slide. Okay, the covers are beautiful. Yes, I agree, both of them. This is the translation team. Jane has also asked everyone to raise their hands. I'm very happy to see some of you here. And it was unfortunate that not everyone could come. We did this online, so that's one of the justifications. And many people were not in São Paulo, and we have actually had 2 translators move out from São Paulo. So that's also why they're not here, but they are following us online. So thank you to all of you who worked very hard on this. All of the students were doing their PhDs, their research, so it was time that they spent really devoted to the translation and to the discussions, because collective translations, they take longer than individual translations because there's a lot of negotiation involved. And to give you a little context, at USP, we have been carrying out several collective translations of several works, and they are very related, because the first one I coordinated in São Paulo at the university was this one, Maria Mies, Patriarchy and Accumulation in World Scale, Women and the Division of Labor. And this translation has a lot to do with land grabbing and colonialism. So this really, after translating Making Empire, I actually discussed with the students many of the aspects that were in this previous translation. And the process was learned as well with the division of labor within the translation itself, was also learned with the first collective translation of Maria Mies' book. Another one, just so you all know, was coordinated by Professor Adriana Zavalha, which is Louise Michel's from the Paris Commune. So this is a 19th century short stories for children. Also here at USP, also collective, done in class with undergrads. So we have been involving graduates and undergrads in collective translations. And these 2 are 3 undergoing translations. And I must confess that 2 of them were informed by Jane's books, right? So the first one we have to the right is Sojourner Truth's narrative, and we are actually making an investigation about the sources of her speeches and selecting text to translate Sojourner Truth's speech, and that has a lot to do with land grabbing as well, because one of her speeches in the 19th century was about why do they not give land to the enslaved in the west of the United States instead of sending us to Liberia, she said in one of her speeches. The one in the middle is Diary of a Paramedic in Gaza, and this is a topic that permeates us all, and empire as well, present conditions of empire and previous, and not only in the past, but having us live through this and now televised empire violence. And this is being done by a group of undergraduates. And the other one is an anthology of British colonial laws. And there are several laws of the Irish applied to Ireland in this anthology, and at the same time, some of two other colonies. And when we compared, one act is particularly interesting because it's about bastardy laws, and it regulates women's bodies. That's the focus of the anthology. And the women's bodies are very differently regulated in Ireland and in Britain. So that's the third one. So these issues that I have listed, Jane has mentioned in her talk about the main terms that we debated and discussed, because all of them made us redefine epistemic spaces. We were very used to knowing what slavery or the slave trade represented to Brazil with its particular terminology. So we had to be very careful in touching that terminology in order for the readers not to have the impression that we're talking about the same thing, because they are similar, but they're definitely not the same thing. So big house and casa grande, for instance, completely different things. Plantation as well, right? And so on, and I won't go into this. We had the opportunity, and I also thank the publisher for this, and Professor Laura as well, and all the other translators, and Mariana played a very important role here. We had the opportunity of writing a preface to the translation, so we mentioned all these, not all of them, but the most challenging terms in the preface. So I invite you to take a look afterwards. And we also reflected upon what is collective translation, right? There are various degrees of collective action, and collective translation is one of them. The methodology we try to employ is one which involves thinking by doing. So it's an opportunity for translator education, critical thinking, and creativity. So when we say that AI is replacing translation, it won't replace translation if you're using translation as a way of thinking, as a way of problem solving, as a way of being creative, and so on. So this, I think, is also the role of the university, right? You can use many ways to interpolate students to think critically, and definitely translation and a translation of a book about colonialism and empire is definitely a major gift to students in this sense. In collective processes, translators and students especially learn to self-organize, engage with each other, negotiate, achieve consensus, right? And it's also part of the infrastructure of dissent, because we have to have books about coloniality, about sexism, racism, topics that don't circulate everywhere, right? And we have a shortage of these topics in mainstream translation markets in Brazil. We know that Brazilian the publishing market has a huge share of translated books, but no, they're all hegemonic, straightforward, culturally dependent, I would say, and don't really have a curatorship that presses that come from universities provide us with. So the role of Unifesp and other university presses are very important in this sense. And it's, of course, very politically different from translating alone, because you deal with other people, you deal with you learn how to other people think, you have ideas, you build on ideas, and it's an amazing way to teach and to learn. So I feel very privileged when I work with students in collective translation. And these are some of the items, yeah. And this is my last slide. And I'll just quote an excerpt about political spaces in collective translation. So, to a greater or lesser extent, the spaces created through collective action and translation processes can be framed within the political, as defined by Hannah Arendt. The political refers to the space created by the gathering of individuals focused on action with shared objectives, fostering conditions conducive to multiple possibilities and also for the unexpected. As a political event, collective translation corresponds to another way of opening the public sphere and realizing political freedom. The necessary condition for such freedom, according to Arendt, is the possibility of speaking and being heard, a leeway often unavailable in some translation processes, or I would say in most translation processes. So my big thank you to all of you involved, and we've heard a lot of agents of empire, but I can say that all of us here today are agents of translation as well. There is a lot of translation agency here. Thank you, Laura, for inviting me to lead this project, and thank you to all of the students and professors who participated.
So now I'd like to invite again Professors Jane Ohlmeyer and Professor Mariana Buffarini to join the table and to start the session of question and answers.
Any questions from the audience?
Hi everyone, my name is Liam Gallagher. I'll be saying a few words later about the association I represent here, but being from Northern Ireland, a lot of what Jane touched on brought home or took me back to painful days back in the 70s when it was virtual civil war in Ireland, and that touched me personally because of a personal relationship with a young lady from the other side of the religious community. I'm being from a Catholic family, and she was from a staunch Protestant family, and we had the most wonderful love relationship for 4 years until her family found out, and then it was downhill after that. But that's just a background, because Jane, you were talking about how the Irish can never get away from this involvement with empire. And although things have improved in Northern Ireland, you and I know that, but one thing I want to ask for your opinion on, today, even after the peace agreement in '98 and everything else that's happened to make the country, to pacify the country and let Catholics and Protestants live together, what do you think about this, especially in the British press, when they talk about Derry? And they say Derry/Londonderry. And as long as you keep on saying Londonderry, we will never get away from the fact that that part of Ireland was colonised by the London Company. So will we ever be able to bury this whole question of the colonisation of Northern Ireland? Or is it going to be around forevermore? So what's your reaction? How do you approach this whole question of Derry, Londonderry?
Sorry. I just tell people to watch Derry Girls. I mean, it's not. The reality is that the city is the city of Londonderry. That's what its name is, in the county of Derry. And I just think if people want to call it Londonderry, call it Londonderry. If they want to call it Derry, call it Derry. I try not to get
hooked on those sorts of things, because I think, especially as we move forward, Liam, you don't want to deny anybody their past or their history. And, you know, Derry is a Protestant citadel, and it features in the documentary that we'll show shortly. And it's such a wonderful example of the complexities of it all. For me, it's not about changing the past, it's about acknowledging it and then saying, let's find a space where we can talk civilly to each other and be respectful towards people who want to call it Londonderry versus, you know, or Derry. I just think we should make it a non-issue and let people, rather than, because the second you start saying we've got to call something somebody, you're going to get somebody's back up. And if it's no longer an issue, it's like with the marching, you know, the apprentice boys marching to mark the siege of Derry, to commemorate the siege of Derry. You know, one way to depoliticize it is just to ignore it, you know, and I think that has been the direction of travel. There's a political maturity in Ireland, and especially in Derry, actually, that I think is actually very inspiring as well. So, you know, that's the way you know, I would approach it.
It's a question for Jane. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the wonderful work you're bringing to the Brazilian Portuguese language. And I was very struck when you said that the colonization process in Ireland in the 17th century was very much like what we are seeing in Gaza now. And I would like you to talk more about it, about this very shocking picture.
I suppose all I'm trying to do is, when I make a statement like that, is for people to understand just how abhorrent what happened in the 17th century was. And sometimes the texts that have survived can't communicate that. Whereas I would have been steeped in this material, and as I read it, I see Gaza. You know, so I'm making those comparisons just to try and allow people to better understand what Ireland was like in this period. But I also think, in a way, looking where Ireland was in the 17th century and looking where Ireland is today, it's a journey of hope, and I hope that will come across very strongly in the film, that there were these moments of absolute intense trauma that went on not just for decades, but for centuries. And yet, out of that has come something that we have obviously a two-state solution in Ireland that is working. The peace process, for all of its faults, is probably one of the most successful, if not the most successful, peace process of modern times. And so maybe Ireland can offer an exemplar of, you know, how things do work out. And let me just say, go back to India and Pakistan. You know, I think it inconceivable that there would be a reunification there. And obviously, you know, Israel and Palestine, it's hugely problematic. But I think in Ireland, it's a very different story. And as I say, maybe one that gives hope. But I'm a historian, so I'm always looking to the past and never to the future.
Thank you, Jen, for giving us this account of the whole book at the same time. And congratulations to the translators, all the group of the translators here. But my question is about the depositions. You mentioned this throughout your book, and I think it is interesting to speak more about that, because in a sense it comes to your recent project of Voices also. So would you like to tell us about it?
And it actually goes back to the previous question as well, Laura. So because of this intense colonization of Ireland, eventually the Catholic population says we've had enough. And they rise up in a massive rebellion in 1641. Now, the English government collects depositions or witness testimonies from the Protestants who have been attacked by their Catholic neighbours. And we have a body of material, 8,000 of them, depositions that describe in graphic detail that violence, ethnic cleansing that occurred. And the violence is extremely intense and includes extreme sexual violence, mostly against women, but also against men. So again, all very modern in terms of modern conflicts. Those depositions are also instruments of the state. They were collected with the explicit purpose of expropriating the Catholics, and the depositions were to be used as evidence against them. So when I talk about the depositions, there should be a huge health warning there as well, that they have a propagandistic purpose to them. However, when we read them against the grain, to paraphrase Laura Ann Stoller, it can tell us a huge amount as well. You have to handle them with extreme caution. And they give us this extremely powerful insight into colonial Ireland and the extent to which Ireland by the mid-17th century had been effectively anglicised, and the way that the Catholic population had been reduced to the position of a second-class citizen. So I think they're an extremely important body of material, but because they were so contested, they've been branded the most controversial historical records in Irish history, and that's saying something, folks. But because they had been used for propagandistic purposes, historians had just ignored them basically for a very long time. So back in 2010, we published them in full online, which, we launched that, and the then president, Mary McAleese, launched it alongside somebody called Ian Paisley. Now, there's a people in the room old enough to know who Ian Paisley was, but he would have been the person who would have used the depositions to stir up anti-Catholic hysteria. And it was a very interesting moment because all of a sudden, myth was becoming history and people were approaching things in a very different way. But Laura, you're right. I continue to work with the depositions for my project on voices because of the 8,000 deponents, nearly 1,000 are female. And in the 17th century, to have so many female voices, albeit by Protestant women mostly, is very important. And of course, the other depositions talk about all types of women. So they're a hugely significant project, but that goes back to 2010 and the publication of the depositions. But they give you this extremely personalized insight into the intensity of interpersonal violence as well. So they're a very, they're a difficult source to use, but I think they can tell us a huge amount. And I turn to the translators because I don't even know how you begin to translate some of this stuff. I mean, it's so specific to the context of Ireland, how you begin to translate some of this into Portuguese. I have nothing but admiration for the skill that you have deployed as you've done this.
Qual é o nome desse documento? Como chama?
Yeah.
Depositions. I'm asking what's the name in Portuguese?
Oh, no, they're not available in Portuguese. If you'd like to translate them, I'd be happy to support that. Sadly, without money, but
Depoimentos.
yeah. They're online. They have been translated into Hindi, which I think was a very interesting choice. So, they have been translated into other languages, and as I say, feel free.
Just one last question. Yes, okay, so Jane, you were born in Zambia, right? From Northern Irish mother and a South African father. I was wondering, how did your background inform both your choice of becoming a historian and your interest in empire?
Wow. I never really talk about the personal side, but I was born in a place called Kitwe, it was then Northern Rhodesia. And then became Zambia after independence. My mother worked for the colonial office as a teacher, and my father, and the reason she worked for the colonial office was because she couldn't get a job doing anything else. It was Ireland in the late 1950s, 60s, and it was the only economic opportunity for her. But having been born and spent a lot of time growing up in Africa at a very a difficult moment, obviously, I mean, it was a very turbulent moment. Of course, it influenced things, but we moved to Belfast when I was 7. And I was born in 1962. That was 1969. The Troubles had broken out the year before. And I think that experience of growing up in Belfast during the Troubles, more than anything, shaped my interest in history, because it became very clear to me that history was being politicized. And history in the wrong hands is a very dangerous political weapon. And so I wanted to understand the craft of history. But also, Ireland was a colony. Northern Ireland, you could argue, still is a colony, although obviously people would contest that. And I just wanted to better understand it all. But I've had an utter fascination with empires my entire life. And it's only recently that everybody else seems to be interested as well, or that's how it feels. And most of my work has been very much in this colonial space. And I was trained outside of Ireland, which I think was very important, with European history, because I think you can't understand what's going on in Ireland without looking comparatively, not just at the, if you want, British Three Kingdoms context, but also at that wider European and Atlantic context, and increasingly global. So wherever I can, I will go to look at, we were talking last night with Robert about Japan and Korea. You know, that's another lovely example. Most of my work to date has been with European empires. I'm fascinated by what the Portuguese Empire here in Brazil, the Spanish Empire, the Dutch, the Danes. I mean, I think all of these stories are very worthy of looking at Ireland in that broader context, Mariana. But you know, without a doubt, these personal moments have definitely shaped things, without a doubt.
Thank you, Jane. And I think this also resonates with us as Brazilians, as a country which has undergone and still faces the consequences of empire, right? So I'd just like to ask one question to Luciana, because she coordinated this collective translation very, very skillfully, and it is very quickly. Especially considering it is a university translation, as you mentioned, which involves research, so it's completely different from a commercial translation. So I was wondering, Luciana, if you could share with us a little bit about, in general, like the challenges in terms of the text itself, standardizing terms and like the final bit of it.
Well, the entire process of technical, can you hear me? Now? Yes? Okay. Well, I think Jane gave an idea of what the challenges are when we face a text like this. The amount of knowledge in the text, the documents, the historical periods, and many of us, we were very lucky that we had Mariana, Vitor, and Esther, but most of us, or most of the group, was not that knowledgeable in Irish history. So I myself, I was with one of the students translating the chapter, the laboratory. Island as Laboratory, and it starts. It really goes into the play translation. So I just stopped everything and went to read the play. And then I was absolutely fascinated by the play, yes, and I even started, more or less translating the play with another group, and to know what happened with the Ordnance Survey, because that play just lays it out for you, and then we could understand the context better. So there's a lot of study in parallel to the translation. And of course, when the text is ready, as in translated, with all this study involved, not only by me, but everyone else who in their respective chapter had to go and dive into history of Ireland and look at other sources. When this work is done, the linguistic translation is also completed, there is an entire editing process, which is done by the press. So Anna here had a huge role in copy desking and the final translation, and pointing out inconsistencies, because even though we read and reread, there are inconsistencies. So it's a very it's the kind of work that depends on a lot of people, right? And skilled professionals and a good publisher, and I guess it won't be done, it won't be finished once you have done the main linguistic and knowledge research for the linguistic translation first, right? It really requires some support, and a lot of support from the press.
Yes, thank you, Luciana. The spreadsheet, right?
Yeah. They made fun of me because I made them fill in a huge spreadsheet. So we had the term that we would challenge, and then an alternative translation 1, translation 2, translation 3, and then in the end we would have the discussion and decide with the aid of Jane, because we had a conference of Jane that helped this part a lot, right? So this proximity with the author, it's also a luxury, right? And a learning opportunity for the students as well, and for myself. And for me.
So I would like to thank Professor Jane Ohlmeyer and Anna Boffarini for their talk. I invite them, to take their seat. And now I'd like to invite to take his place at the table, Liam Gallagher, Treasurer for the Irish Business Network, Brazil.
Can you hear me? Okay, good, great. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Liam Gallagher. Any connection to the singer of Oasis, please put that out of your minds. It has nothing to do. There is no relationship at all. In fact, he was born William Gallagher, but I was born Liam, which is the Gaelic, the Gaelicization of the English name William. So I've been in Brazil. I left Northern Ireland. A little bit of background, first of all. Those of you who don't know me, I left Northern Ireland in 1979. Like Jane, I was a victim, or I witnessed at first hand the Troubles. And coming from a small city in Northern Ireland, in northwest Ulster, where 70% were Protestant and 30% were Catholic, they were difficult times, but we never had any problems locally. But in the wider context of Northern Ireland, we felt, and a term that Jane used also, we were second-class citizens. So, on the other hand, a very important thing happened to me. I never thought I'd ever come to Brazil, but I went to a Catholic primary school, and automatically on leaving primary school, or elementary school as they call it in Brazil, I would have gone to the Christian Brothers College in Derry City. But my elder brother before me, he had a health complaint, and he couldn't travel. In fact, his life was, it was life-threatening. So my father went to speak to the bishop and asked for dispensation so that my brother wouldn't have to go to the Catholic school, and the bishop refused 3 times. So my dad went across the street. We live very close to the main Protestant school, and he spoke to the headmaster of a Protestant school, explained the situation, and the headmaster said, I will have to pay daily for this to the board of governors, but I will take Desmond, my brother. And as they say in Brazil, onde passa boy, passa uma boiada. I don't know how to translate that, but it was the start of a change in the town and the school, because the school wanted to expand. There weren't enough Protestant students, and they were taking on Catholics. And I was happy to say I spent 7 wonderful years at this school. Then I went to Queen's University, Belfast, to do Russian. I could have gone to a university in the UK, but I wanted to stay near home. I wanted to read Russian in Belfast, where I met my girlfriend. I think I've told you that already. We had 4 years at university together, and then the whole thing fell apart. But I decided to leave Northern Ireland because I couldn't stand this whole situation. The university was a microcosmos of Northern Ireland. The students just wanted to be students and live their lives. But the whole thing was permeated by hate, by mistrust at Queen's University. So I left Queen's University. I applied for a job with a bank in London. I think, well, I'll give it a go. My girlfriend was there at the time. So I joined Lloyds Bank International in London, spent 5 months in London training, and then at the end of the course I was told, Liam, you're being sent to Brazil. I said, wow. So all my colleagues were jealous because myself and 2 others were dispatched to Brazil as trainees. So I arrived in Brazil in August 1979 on a 2-year contract, and I spent 14 years in banking. I married a Brazilian. I have 2 kids born in São Paulo, and this actually has been a feature of my life ever since. Brazil is my second home. And if I could say today, Ireland and Brazil have so much in common, not just music and culture, but the welcome we had as foreigners. Open arms, yeah, come and join us, work here. So I decided to stay in 1988. Then change happened in the Brazilian banking market, and I lost my job for the 3rd time. And I started doing translation work, like a pastime. And then suddenly I joined a translation agency, and I worked for the agency. And I left the agency. I was fired again for the 4th time. And I created my own company. And through this company, I really began to identify, the Portuguese and English, English and Portuguese. And once at a happy hour or party for the owner of the agency I worked for, she said to me, Liam, why don't you give interpreting a bash? Which I did. And I applied for the course at POCI. I'm very proud to say that I had Luciana as one of my teachers, and also a couple of other I learned a lot, and it was a very important part of my training. And so I created my own company, and then I was invited to become part of, back in 2019, and Robert will remember this, the Consul General in São Paulo was beginning to create, there was a consulate and there were other entities, but Barry was the consul, and he wanted to create an Irish Business Network Brazil. And we got together a small group of very eager entrepreneurs. We started off with 9, 10, 12 people very interested in getting the thing going, but then it all began to fall apart. We managed to survive even through the pandemic, and today there are 4 or 5 of us who keep the fires alive. What is the idea today? We've just had a new president elected in March. Michael Smith couldn't be here tonight because he lives in Bertioga, and he's kept there by his work. But he's asked me to stand in for him in his absence. And the entity today is managed by a small group of Irish entrepreneurs, each with his own business, but also dedicated to the goal of growing our network of people within the Irish-Brazilian community. Note how I said Irish-Brazilian, because who we want to target, who we want to join us, and not only Brazilians or Irish people coming to Brazil. We provide advice, we help them settle, but also Brazilians, and there are a lot of them, with Irish connections. You'd be amazed. I think probably Robert has the exact figure, but it's estimated that there are about 80,000 something, 70, 80,000 Brazilians in Ireland today, mostly in the Republic of Ireland, working, studying, and so on. So we're expanding now to look at the diaspora, trying to get the Irish people in Brazil together. It's not difficult because the Irish are the following, and I speak from experience. If you tell Irish people, we're going to have a party, we're going to form a group, and everyone's invited, they'll say, oh yes, I'm interested, and they'll come along, and they'll come to the party, but ask them to get involved in organizing it, in keeping it going. No, I've got no time, I live in the interior, I can't do it. So every year it's come down to 4 or 5 stalwarts who we've managed to keep the ball rolling forward. What we're doing now in targeting the Irish diaspora here is to provide a platform for our members, for them to raise their profiles, share their passions, and gain valuable insights on life in Brazil. It's not just like changing your shirt coming from Ireland to Brazil. And we're looking to expand within the Irish diaspora here, but also to attract more Brazilians. Brazilians, when they talk about Ireland, their eyes light up. They say, wow, I was treated so well. They didn't want to come back, but had to come back for whatever reason. Some have stayed there. And this is where we're trying to expand the invitation to any and all Brazilians with links to the our country to join us here. And one of the ideas we came up with was, I know Munira and Laura for many, many years. And we have decided to partner with the Chair of Irish Studies, with Laura and her team, Mariana and Victor, to develop other projects and look forward to developing a more, besides the business aspect, a more cultural aspect to the IBNB. And hopefully with Mariana and her team, in the weeks and months ahead, we can find lots of common ground. A lot is going to happen, and we want to be part of that, and we want to share with the Chair of Irish Studies here at USP. So we're open to people who want to join us. It's free, there are no fees, but we want to get more people involved in promoting this Irish Brazil, these links, which have existed for years, but we want to take this to the next level. So anyone here tonight interested in knowing more about the IBMB, talk to me afterwards, visit our page on Facebook, and we'll be delighted to have you and to tell you what we're doing and to welcome you on board to do it with us. Thank you very much indeed. I'll take any questions if there are any difficult questions, except for rock music and pop music, please.
Thank you very much, Liam. As we come to the end of this event, on behalf of the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies, I would like to thank Professor Jane Ohlmeyer for her presence and for generously sharing her work with us, as well as Consul General Mr. Robert Jackson, Professor Miriane Mendes de Abreu, and Professor Luciana Carvalho Fonseca, and all of you who joined us for the celebration. And the book, Fazendo Império, available in the entrance of the auditorium. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening. And now we invite you to join us for the screening of the celebrated film from that small island, The Short Story of the Irish, at USP.